Hey, hi, hello. We're online, and so are you. Welcome to Set Status Online, the internet show for a little bit of internet sanity for the terminally online. This is officially the first episode of, I hope, many. And if you are listening to this, then I hope you do stick around. I think there are going to be some really cool conversations and cool topics. And yeah, this will hopefully turn into a little bit of a therapy session for anyone who spends time online, which I assume is everyone. But to kick off the first episode, I thought I would tackle something that has been running through my head for a while now, and it came off the back of a chat that I had recently about in-person networking, and this weird thing of why we find it so scary to approach a human being at a conference or a meetup, or even just strangers in the street or at a bar. There seems to be like a significant feeling of pressure or stakes involved, right? There's some fear of judgment to some degree. And I had to think about the fact that so much of our interactions with people nowadays, they all take place via chat apps or DMs. And I think we're conditioned from a young age that these face-to-face meetings are high-stakes engagements. Things that happen in real life seem to be reserved, so to speak, for things that have high expectations attached to them. Things like going to the principal's office, or a message that says, "We need to talk in person," or one that says, "Can you come to my office?" Think about like wedding proposals, or going to the office for a specific thing, or a meeting when I normally work remotely, right? Like all of those things are where we lean on in-person meetings because there's a seriousness or importance around said thing. And I think this is even true in dating. I mean, I think we can all relate to the fact that we feel more comfortable to send a picture to a stranger on a dating app rather than go up to someone at a bar and say hi. And that is interesting to me, that we feel safer behind the safety of a screen or an app than we do presenting ourselves as a real human being to someone in person. I think we've become very reliant on the comfort of being able to mute a notification, delete a chat, block a contact, etc. But when most of our interactions default to sending a message to someone via WhatsApp, Signal, LinkedIn, Slack, whatever it is, then I keep thinking like there's no surprise that we've become sensitive around interactions that happen offline. They are the exceptions. They are for things that can't or shouldn't take place online because they're too important. And this made me think. I often find that after a few hours around people, my social battery can be significantly drained. And I think, this is obviously different from person to person, and it isn't with all interactions. Friends might drain it slower than a work meeting with colleagues or a big family event. So content and context obviously matter a lot here. But I do feel like there is something around this culture that when we engage 90% of the time via a chat app of some kind, that it lowers our resilience to in-person interactions. And physiologically, just the amount of energy our body uses when engaging with someone in real life is much higher than via an app. Right? There are social cues, there's body language that our senses need to pay attention to, all that stuff. And our body doesn't need to tap into that energy when we type a message on our phone or on a laptop. I think it's also easier to have the time to backspace or rewrite or get ChatGPT to write up a response than it is to think on our feet and think in the moment. And it's kind of the same like if you don't run for a month and you lose some cardiovascular stamina, or if we aren't interacting with people face to face as often as we did, 5, 10, 20 years ago, then it makes sense that we lose some stamina in those situations. And it's not right or wrong necessarily. I don't think I'm trying to judge one or the other so much as bring attention to that difference or that sort of dissonance that I'm feeling. But I just think it's interesting to be aware of the impact that chat apps are having on how we treat in real life IRL interactions. And I think at some point, knowing this and being aware of this, I think it could be quite useful to question those moments. Like, if you are at a conference or a meetup, or let's even just say a social gathering, and you feel the urge to introduce yourself to a stranger, but you feel quite scared or afraid, I think it's useful to ask, like, is there an actual threat or risk? Right, why am I so afraid? What's the worst that could happen? Maybe even think about, like, if I were DMing them on Instagram, right, would I have the same fear? Why not? And side note, I think most of us wouldn't have the same fear to DM someone on Instagram. I know that may not always be true. I think if there is a certain crush aspect to it, then there might be some reservations even in that context. But I think generally the fear is less if it's through a screen. I think it's interesting to question why. Or even if you struggle to have conversations that last 2 hours or more, like if you feel your rhythm or your flow sort of disappearing after an hour or so, like think about why, or question why that feels so hard. Like, what could be making that so hard? Why does it take so much energy? And I think personally that last one is quite true. And I think I often used to, or often do, question, like, well, whether I'm interesting enough, or whether I'm a bad friend for feeling tired after only an hour, or not feeling like carrying on the conversation and trying to force it because you don't want the other person to feel like you're not interested or you don't want to be there. And I don't think it necessarily has to be that at all. I think it's a very natural reaction to have for most people. But I'm also not surprised that, when it comes to chat apps or whatever the social media conversation platform is, that it's more of like short, sharp interactions, and there's like, we can control the dosage, right, of the engagement. Whereas if it's a in-person sit-down thing, it's quite constant. And you can't just dash in and out. You can't put your phone away for a second and come back later. I think there is this expectation of constant attention and awareness. And of course, chat apps, I am not surprised that chat apps are lowering our resilience to that. I think it is a case of getting back into the swing of things and practicing it. And again, content and context matter. There are often conversations I have that go on for what feels like an hour but ends up being 4 hours. And there, the variables are people and timing, what kind of day you had, those kinds of things. But I do feel like our relationship to chat apps has an impact nevertheless. But anyways, I do think we should be placing more value again on, as a society, on face-to-face relationships and interactions. I don't think anyone I know would disagree with that. But it's easy to default to chat apps because they're available in all forms, right? LinkedIn messages, sending a WhatsApp, sending a voice note. We can do it on the way to work, in between tasks at home, when we're bored on the couch. There is this constant availability of social interaction if we want it. And I think that if is very important because there is this tap in, tap out, jump in, jump out, take a break, dive in aspect that is very appealing because we get to pick exactly the amount that we have capacity for. And I think that is inherently useful. But it does mean that when we are put into in-person situations that we have these unnecessary reservations about approaching a stranger. I mean, I wish we still lived in a society or in a world where you would go to a cafe and sit down and strike up a conversation with the people sitting next to you. It's not that it doesn't happen, but I just don't think the frequency is as high as it used to be. And I think that makes me a little bit sad, and I'm very much potentially old school in the sense, but I do personally get enjoyment and value from looking a person in the eyes, and yeah, there are just things I prefer to do offline. For me, that's still important to communicate certain things in person, very, very personally. If I'm checking in with friends, if I'm sharing life updates or exciting news, or wanting to hear about exciting news from be it friends or family, or even just meeting new people, I prefer to do those offline. And that is just a personal preference. But I do feel like there is an opportunity to bring a little bit more awareness into the interactions we have and what we do online and why we do it online. I think that why is quite crucial. But I think intentional online interactions are a lot healthier than default online interactions, because it's easier or because you've always done it that way. And I will add a note that I think chat apps have become very useful for people who struggle with social interactions. I think they have opened up a lot of opportunities for people to make friends in scenarios or in contexts that they normally wouldn't be able to have made friends. I don't think opening up socially to strangers comes as naturally to everyone as it does to some people. And I think chat apps have a massive role in those people's lives that I don't think is fair to ignore. That being said, I wonder what the world will look like in 20 years and how our interactions will continue to change and our capacity for online and offline interactions will continue to change, or to what extent they'll continue to change. And again, I'm not trying to make a judgment or don't want to make a judgment of whether it's good or bad, but I do think it is quite interesting to be aware of and think about, at least in our own lives. If you have any thoughts on this, I would love to hear from you. And as promised, I guess, in the trailer, these episodes are meant to be nice and short, nice and succinct, easy enough to listen to on your way to or on your way from work, on your lunch break, while you walk the dog, because I know I don't have an hour to listen to a podcast all the time, and sometimes it's nice for a short moment to listen to something to get your creative juice, your thinking going a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I really hope to see you back here again for another episode. Thank you for listening.